Hi, welcome to another episode of Skeptic Hangout, where we like to talk about topics of the day from a skeptical perspective. My name is Kelley Laughlin, and I'm joined by the amazing Richard Gilliver, excuse me, and by the amazing Puck, too, somebody I love working with, and I love working with Richard. How are you guys doing today?
Fantastic. It's great to be here. Good to be working with you guys again.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to this one. This is a topic I'm looking forward to tackling as well.
I'm always happy to work both of you guys. So we are going to be talking about, tell us, Richard.
Religion versus science, I believe it is we're talking about this week, which is
Yes, it is. Do you have any first thoughts you want to start us out with, Puck?
Okay, so when I think about religion versus science, I'm showing my biases here, but at least I own it. The first place that I immediately think is education, where there have been many cases that continue to this day, where religious beliefs are being taught as scientific fact in schools. And somehow this is still a conversation, even though I thought that it was settled a very long time ago. It turns out no, there are still some school districts that are pushing, say it with me, intelligent design theory and
Mm-hmm.
trying to teach it as co-equal with established scientific theory. That's the first place that I go is education, but it's so broad and they intersect in so many bizarre ways. I'm sure that I'm not even touching the half of it.
Yeah, I think religion versus science itself is a little bit of a misdemeanor because they're not they're not diametrically opposed to each other, and I think there are plenty of occasions where they do kind of cross paths in a kind of way where they shouldn't, and the kind of education one that Puck mentioned is it's the Texas School Board. I think they've tried about 2 or 3 times. People have approached the Texas School Board trying to get creationism taught alongside evolution as a co-equal theory. With the kind of excuse that people should be taught all theories, not just one. But it's not a theory, and this is where the kind of we get the idea of religion versus science. Or for me at least, that's where it comes in. It's not about saying that religion and science can't be looked at together. It's about where they intersect, and the kind of excuses are given that they are equal in value, and they are not. Kelley.
Yes, that is correct. They're not equal, and there you can reconcile the two. One of my good friends, believe it or not, is a geologist, and he is also a Christian. He's retired now as a geologist, got bored, and he started teaching science at the local Catholic school. He's not a Catholic, but he's still a Christian, and he feels that it's his duty to teach these kids science so they aren't confused by these things like intelligent design, which are totally unscientific and come out of a completely religious view with absolutely no evidence behind them. And I think that there's a lot of room for both science and religion, just like my friend Sean, that's his name, can do. He can have look at the world from a religious perspective and still have a scientific outlook on which to analyze the world and the way it works. And I don't see a reason why we can't reconcile those two things. I have a passage from a book here. It's Wallace and Bates in the Tropics. It was edited by Barbara Bettel, and she writes in it, "It is easy to misunderstand science and scientific method. Science does not do away with beauty or ethics. Instead, it is limited by definition to what can be observed and measured. It is a servant that can be used to discover how things work, and in doing so, it reveals an underlying order. But it makes no claims to explaining the ultimate why, nor is it a substitute for systems of ethics. And one is only to read other scientists' vivid descriptions to see that interest in science does not exclude appreciation of beauty." And I think that sums it up pretty well, that there are these two ways of looking at the world that you can have. You can have both of those outlooks on the world and still be a normal person, that you don't have to choose one or the other.
That's the
So
end
I
of the
think another
episode then.
interesting
Yeah,
no,
that's
I
it.
think an
We're
interesting
done. We
episode
figured
though
it
is
out.
like where it hits legislation, right? Because like for a person to have their own religious belief and to let that person's religious belief dictate their own personal choices, that's fine. Just to hit on the really big one, if it is against someone's religion to have an abortion, well, I'm not gonna, you know, that's their belief and that's what they want for themselves. But then to make laws based on that, now that takes it to another level where it's taking a religious belief and trying to bring it to make everybody compliant with it. How does that saying go? It's like being on a diet and telling everybody else they can't have donuts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I've come across an astrophysicist who is also a religious apologist, and they make the mistake that kind of leads people into making the comparison between religion and science to begin with, and that is by confusing the opinion of a scientist who happens to be religious with the work of a scientist who happens to be religious. And this is something I come across all the time. And it's not just, this isn't an attack against Christians, because it's not just Christians. This is people of many different religious backgrounds. And very, very often I'll hear them say, well, such and such a science has said this, and they believe in God. Well, what they say, their opinion, is absolutely irrelevant on the matter. It's what the work actually shows that's important. Kelley, have you got, what's your thoughts on that kind of thing? And have you heard that?
Yeah, I've heard that quite often. I don't know how many times I've had a Christian mention Dr. Francis Collins to me, and how, you know, even the guy who came up with the human genome believes in God. So, and I don't think that just because you're a scientist and you believe in God proves that God is real. And that seems to be the take on a lot of people that I talk to that bring that up. Right. Well, this great science, you know, you believe in science and this scientist believes in God. So you should believe in God if you believe in science. Well,
Yeah.
that's not believing in science. That's believing in a scientist, right? Exactly what you said, the words as opposed to the work.
Yeah,
So, no, and
literally the argument from authority in practice when that's occurring.
there's even a historian apologist. I don't remember their name, but they went so far as to say that the reason I believe the things I do about God and Jesus in the Bible is because of theological reasons. The tools of history don't get me there. Like the
Yeah.
tools of history will only take me so far. Even, you know, even though this is my field, I am studying early Middle East cultures, and nothing in history is ever going to get me to theology. I believe for completely different reasons than the history that I'm studying.
Yeah, and I think to touch on that and what Kelley said earlier, I think they're both very good points, which leads to saying that it's, you know, science can only take us so far, and that's not a bad thing. By honestly, I've thrown myself off now. By it's not a bad thing by any stretch of the imagination. The thing is, it's okay to say I don't know. Science is still the best single way as a kind of set of methodologies to determine what is most likely true and determine how the world likely works. And by far, and it comes to a point that there's things it can't answer, and in that respect, and even asking questions within science, philosophy is a good tool to use as a means of gaining kind of the truth, rather than and yeah, there's going to be people screaming at the TV or the radio or wherever you live. The radio. How old am I? However you're listening to this podcast. Probably not through the radio, it has to be said. The science is a subset of philosophy, and yes, it is. But I'm talking about more in the kind of realms of asking questions in philosophy, and that's very useful even within science. But there's certain things science can't touch, and then we kind of get to the area of kind of people trying to use syllogisms to answer questions that they want to answer about God and the supernatural claims and the religious claims. So, again, in my experience, what they tend to do is they start with the answer and they try to work backwards from that. And a good example of this is kind of the when we're talking about how what happened before the Big Bang and that set of stages of things. Now, in what we have is kind of two options when we're talking about philosophy. We have something that is necessary, or something that is deterministic on other things happening before it. And what these apologists tend to do is jump straight into it's necessary. God is necessary, so therefore this that's the only thing. But when you look at the actual philosophy, there's no consensus on this, and this it's I'm happy with either position. Whether what happened, because again, this is something else they do. They equate a necessary being, which is not a living being in philosophy, it's a thing. They equate a necessary being with God, but doesn't have to be the case. There can be a pre-existing physical condition which is necessary, which is the thing that existed and always existed, from which our present universe came. That's possible, and it doesn't have to be God. And another possibility is an infinite regress of things, of dependent things. And that's also a possibility. I don't know which is more likely. I think both are acceptable. What happens with kind of religious apologists, though, is they skip this part of it. They start with God. So automatically, it's got to be something that's necessary, and something having an infinite regress is not a possibility to them. And this, not only do they kind of take this one side of the argument as read, but they also ascribe that to being God. And this is really, really difficult for kind of me to like get my head around as someone who's genuinely looking for the what is likely true. I'm really interested in the science and the philosophy of finding out what is likely true. And there seems to be a huge step that's skipped by certain people in religious quarters to try and kind of evidence their own conclusion before they've looked at the evidence for the conclusion. I have been talking for a long time. I'm going to throw it out to you guys.
I was just letting you come back from the break, because I thought you were, when you said necessary and contingent, I thought you had gone full on presuppositional apology. I was like, all right, let's wait. Maybe there's some merit to this. But yeah, anybody who's studied things like infinities and understands why Zeno's paradox is a false paradox with regards to traversing infinities will understand. It's like, yeah, it's a philosophical use of the term infinity, but it is actually possible to traverse infinities, including temporal infinities. Plus, like there's a weird thing about how the phrase that gets used to, which is a very poor wording of the phrase, is that past a certain point and under certain conditions, physics as we know it breaks down, like time. The concept of relative time breaks down. That's not a great way to describe it, but yeah, past a certain point, we don't know, and we can only guess. And usually, that's where religion will step in and say, "Aha, that's where God is." Right. And the big beef that I have about religion versus science is that religion will then, and this is not all religious people, but it's, as soon as I say this, you'll understand where I'm going, is that religion will actually bar exploration through that avenue because it's starting to touch what is sacred to that religion. Like, how many times have we seen a movie or something where someone has decided to eradicate a certain population in favor of another and say, you can't do that, you're playing God. right? So the idea of being able to be in charge of life and death is thought of as a religious thing. That's the reason I let you go on, because I wanted to see just how presuppositional apologies you're going to know. So thank you very much for not taking it there. I get what you mean about necessary and contingent, but I also get what you mean about saying that there's nothing in that argument that says it, unless you go WLC and say it must be timeless, spaceless, intentional, personal, and what was the other one? I keep forgetting.
But
Timeless, personal, immaterial. Immaterial. There you go.
But even then,
So,
you've kind of
but
got to
thank you
start with the
for
conclusion.
bringing us back.
Yeah, even then, you've got to start with the conclusion, and this is what you find in virtually every case when you're talking to these apologists. That not only are they leaning heavily one way, it's not based on the evidence for that particular thing. It's based on the conclusion and working backwards from that. Kelley, I think you deserve a chance to speak.
No, that's okay. I've been totally enjoying the conversation. I've been making some notes. I had some ideas, and we've kind of like veered away from some of the things that I was thinking about. But I think you're right. I mean, it's the religious people that have to keep this idea of their deity being in charge of everything that are really fighting back against science. I don't ever see science fighting against religion. It seems to be a one-sided fight to me. And that's something I wanted to really point out, because I don't again, like I said, I don't understand why we have to fight about it. I have a good friend who once said to me, religion provides the things in life that science does not. And I thought that was a pretty interesting thing to say, and it's very poignant and right on point. It's just science, religion does provide things that science can't teach us about, but that's the only thing that religion can do for us. It doesn't tell us how to tie a shoe. It doesn't tell us, it doesn't give us engineering statistics. It doesn't tell us when we should plant plants, right? And that's the kind of thing that we need science for. We need science to interpret the actual physical world. And religion isn't good for that. Religion should be kept to the metaphysical and the spiritual.
Yeah, I mean, I would push back slightly on that in some cases. For example, if we're talking about ethics, a lot of people will say it's religion's job to inform ethics, but I think science can help us inform ethics as well by giving us data and information that we can use to base ethical considerations on.
Oh, I
So,
agree.
so I don't think religion is kind of fills a void that science can't touch. I think science fills a void that religion can't touch,
Yes,
but I
yes,
don't
exactly.
necessarily think it's the other way around.
That's
No,
what I
and
mean. There's like it's two different worlds that exist within our world, right? There's the physical world. I got to stop saying right so much, but there's this physical world that we deal with on an everyday basis, and then there's this metaphysical world that we deal with inside of our heads, and we're trying to reconcile those two things, and they often don't reconcile. And unfortunately, religious people decide to use what's in their head over what they're seeing in the real world, and that's where the real problem lies to me. Sorry, Puck, go ahead.
no, because the next problem is that religion, one space that religion plays in that science does not, is in a pre-existence or afterlife, a post-existence, right? So now we can't just take a look at the decisions that are being made here on our puny little secular humanist plane, but we must also take into considerations, for example, what ancestors would have wanted, or where they're guiding us, or what might happen to an immortal soul after we die. So yeah, even though here on this temporal existence we might not be doing things according to scientific right, but it's going to be best for our eternal existence. And therefore, since that's much more important, we should be making laws and making an ethical system and a moral system based on not how we treat each other here, but what's going to give us the best chance of happiness and well-being in a pre-existence or a post-existence. So that's another place where they tend to clash.
Yeah, I think
So, like, we can look at now and say, okay, well, scientifically, it shows that that people who get certain therapies for certain mental health conditions will have better outcomes. Like, that's scientific fact. We know that, we've done the studies over and over again. That's what science does. Then religion says, is this something that we should be curing in this way, or should the people who have this just be ostracized?
Hmm.
Because yeah, I get it. They're going to have a miserable existence here, but it saves all of us in the eternity.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I was speaking to someone earlier, and I was talking about how people have shifted and been kind of religious people who think that there's no medical intervention is necessary, and that prayer is all they need. And I almost went prayer, and I don't know why. That prayer is is the only intervention needed if someone is ill, and how they've kind of shifted the stance as their education, as personal education, has improved, and they've been led to a wider kind of field of education from the one they grew up with. And I think that's and I think Puck touched on this at the very start of the show. It's a vitally important point that education is hugely, hugely necessary. And it's not even about, for me, it's not about getting people away from their religious beliefs. It's about giving them the tools to have better conversations and make better decisions. And medicine is one that's right really at the forefront of that. If giving people education will get them away from thinking that prayer is going to cure a serious illness, to going to the doctor and getting the doctor to help them, get better, I think that is always going to be a victory. And it doesn't matter whether they still come out a believer at the end of the day. It's giving them those tools that they can make better, more informed decisions.
So how do we get religious people to accept science easier? What would be a good way to get them to swallow that science pill?
Ooh, this is something I think about a lot. May I jump in here?
Yeah,
This
please.
is
That's
okay.
why I'm asking.
So
I was hoping to get a good answer, and I think you probably have one the way you're acting.
so when it comes to education, the reason people don't do a lot of pushback on math, like you never really hear religious people saying, the Riemann zeta function is heretical, is because when most of us learn math, we learn the fundamentals first. We build up from those fundamentals, and everything that we learn in the future builds on the arithmetic, the algebra. That's how we get trigonometry. That's how we get calculus, and on and so forth. And you know how you get up there because you go through all these little steps in between. Science, observational science especially, is not like that, because we have to start with our observations. Oh, it's raining, right? We don't have the foundation of science to learn about how the water cycle works. We don't know how meteorology works yet. We just have that basic understanding of, look, it's raining. And because you learn about science not from learning it foundationally, but learning from the observations first and then going from there, that's where it leaves room for religious interpretation. It's like, yes, it's raining because God wants it to rain, or something like that. So if we want to attack where religion plays in the field of science, I believe we must attack how it's taught from an early age to our kids.
Mhm.
Exactly how, I haven't figured that out yet. But if we did it foundationally like we did math, I think we would go a lot further than if we did it, in our current model of, hey, let's take some observations. Let's take 7-year-olds and put them into science fairs, and have them do, science experiments without teaching them the real foundations of what's happening behind what they're doing.
You,
I,
you know,
Go
Go
on,
ahead,
Kelley.
Richard.
No,
No,
you
go
go.
ahead, please. All right, I will. I will. I will. You were talking about the rain there, and it made me think of something, and it may or may not be relevant to the topic, but in medieval times, that it wasn't God that was causing the rain. The thunderstorms were created by demons in the air, and the way to get rid of the thunderstorm was to have the bell ringer run to the church and start ringing the bell to chase away the evil demons, because the sound of the holy church bells would chase away the demons. And this is true. You can look this up. I am not making this up. And as a result, many, many, many bell ringers were killed. They were electrocuted by lightning. And I'm thinking, when you're sitting there talking about that, I'm thinking, if they had just embraced the science, how many lives would have been saved of people that were electrocuted because they were trying to chase the demons away during a thunderstorm?
was gonna say the worst place to be in a storm is a bell tower. Did they
Yes,
only send
yes,
people they didn't really want to keep around? Like it's
yes, yes. And
okay.
so I brought it up because it's a really good illustration of how religious thinking that overpowers scientific thinking can really be bad. It can often be detrimental.
I saw that John Smith eyeing my wife up the other week. I'm going to have him as a new bell ringer.
Yeah.
So, Richard, is there any room in the science versus religion conversation? I'm asking you specifically because you're a philosopher person. Where does the is ought problem fall in here? Because it seems like science can come up with a bunch of ises, and religion is where we go to find the oughts.
I don't. I think
It's interesting.
it's a wide-ranging question.
Yes.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know the answer.
Okay. No. Maybe it is nowhere. Look, I'm just a baby philosopher. I know that the is ought problem exists, but I don't know how it plays into anything else. So.
Yeah, I
But
don't know. Go on, Kelley.
that's my thought though. Is that I mean, science may give us tools for discovery and finding information and processing information. It doesn't give us any sort of moral compass about it, right? It is
No.
at best amoral, right? So you find out, okay, this disease has this kind of virulence and this kind of outcomes. This percentage of people will die if they get it. That's cool. Okay, does that tell us how we should, if at all, how do we make changes in society to stem the spread of this disease? Again, if at all.
Yeah.
And you hear usually from a very strong religious mindset that if something like this were true, then that's the will of our deity, and we don't have to do any legislation to stop it. In fact, we should be allowed to freely express our right to not take any preventative measures. And now I'm going only 3 years back when I say this. This is not ancient history. This is the coronavirus pandemic, where religious groups were saying, no, we don't have to listen to your science rhetoric about how this disease is going to spread and we're all going to get sick. We should have a right to go ahead and gather the way we always wanted to gather, and not have to have protective measures because it's now interfering with our expression of religion.
Yeah, it's a difficulty when that kind of level of I don't even know what to call it. I was going to say ignorance, but I don't think that's fair because that kind of gives the impression that I think the people themselves are ignorant, and they're not. In a lot of cases, in other areas of the life, they're very, very intelligent people.
Mm-hmm.
And it just when it comes to this kind of one aspect of the life, the for some reason they suspend that to allow for these beliefs to take hold and continue.
It's hard to find a word that doesn't come off sounding insulting, right? And it's not the intention. I don't want to insult these people because I don't feel that they deserve to be insulted, but they are doing something that most reasonable people wouldn't do. They're believing in some magical thing, and it's just and putting their lives at risk over this magical thing, thinking that it's going to protect them when that's just such flawed thinking.
Yeah, and this is for me a very, very interesting conversation regarding religion versus science, because as I said from the outset, I don't think we need look at religion as an entity to be versus science as an entity. I think there's plenty of room, and there are plenty of very, very good scientists who are also religious and hold religious beliefs. And the key aspect for me is the not to confuse that belief with the work they do, which is the kind of push that apologists tend to kind of want to push forward. And apologist, for anybody who's listening who doesn't know, it's just a way of saying defending religion. But when you get religious apologists, they tend to be dishonest. I'm going to say it out as it is. They tend to be dishonest. I'm not going to kind of fancy it up to make it sound anything other than that. And they kind of they tend to know what they're doing, and they tend to do it on purpose to kind of to push their opinion. There's a thing in the Church of England where kind of most scholars within the Church of England know how the Bible was formulated, and there's some very good scholarship from people within the Church of England on this subject about how the Bible was formulated, and the fact that the God of the Bible in the Old Testament came from an amalgamation of other gods and lived amongst a pantheon of other gods at the time. And they don't pass that information on to the congregants, even though they know it. And I think this is endemic in religion overall, to some degree. The kind of there's this in the Church of England. I think it's more of a passive dishonesty. I think they're aware of it, but they kind of excuse it. I think in kind of mainstream apologetics, it's an active dishonesty. They know they're doing it full well, and they still do it, and do it because it's effective for their ends. Kelley.
No, I have my own thoughts on apologetics, which is probably all its own show. Apologetics in the strictest possible definition is the defense of a belief, which if all you do is say something that is so stupid it stops the conversation, you know what? You succeeded. Because I don't think apologetics is designed to convince as much as it is designed to protect. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
I think
Yeah,
I think
it
it's
makes
more
total
for the
sense.
inside. So when I think of apologetics in any sense, yeah, even if, like, looking back on it, we can see that it's fallacious, it gives the person who uses that apologetic something to hold on to. Even if it doesn't make sense to us, it makes sense enough to them.
Yeah, we're coming up onto the end, so let's each give our final thoughts on this subject.
Okay. One point I really wanted to make before we ended was that back in the late 1600s, early 1700s, when we were experiencing the beginnings of the sciences, who was doing that science? It was a lot of people who were monks, priests, and because they were the people who had the money and the leisure time to do it. And somewhere along the way, science and religion took a big fork away from each other. And I think it was because what those guys were finding wasn't fitting the things that they were reading in their own religious books. And maybe we need to get more of these religious people back into the sciences like the Catholics do with the Jesuits are pretty scientific minded, although they're still steeped in that religious doctrine of the Bible. But maybe if we start getting more and more religious people more involved in science, we can maybe make this gap a little bit shorter, a little narrower.
Yeah, and by getting them back into the science, I think we need to kind of move away from the fact that there might be a religion versus science as entities that are opposed to each other, because they're just not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they should be complementing each other.
Puck.
And I think they will, as long as they maintain their balance of power, because religions want to keep some amount of influence, whether it's social influence, political influence, whatever. And as soon as that's challenged, that's when they're going to say, wait a second, now we have to draw some hard line somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been a good one, and whenever either science or religion come up, I am very excited in the topic. Because religion is my area of study, and I'm just a geek for science, so it's a perfect combination. I think that's a good place to end the show. Well, thank you very, very much for joining us. If you want to have your say on religion versus science or anything we've touched upon today, please join us in the Facebook fan group and give us your opinions. We will probably reply to you because we tend to be quite active in there as well. So yeah, and thank you very much for your time. We will be back next week. Thank you very much for watching.